make up, for those of you who don't know bio and don't know much about the biotech industry, we are made up of 1,100 members, roughly 800 of which are in the business of taking biotechnology and making new products. Most of these companies, of course, are healthcare companies, and you'll be hearing today about a lot of the things that are going on in our industry there. We are the folks who are going to bring you personalized medicine. We are the folks who are bringing you tomorrow's medicines today. We also have companies, of course, involved in agriculture, modifying organisms to make plants and crops which will grow in climates they've not been able to grow in the past, will grow more bountiful, so hopefully solving many of the world's food shortages, difficulties. And we also have companies involved in industrial environmental applications. These are companies which are finding new fuels which will sustain our economy. So it's an exciting time to be involved in biotechnology. I'll make the offer to each and every one of you here. Whatever you need to know about biotechnology and the companies, please reach out to me. Again, I'm Brent Del Monte with Bio, but we have a whole team of policy folks and lobbyists and others at Bio who can answer any question you have. And frankly, we're located in virtually every state, in virtually any district. So if there's ever an opportunity that you want to have to come out and see a member company, or for your boss to learn more about biotechnology, just let us know and we'll set that up. Last, before I turn it over to the group, we're being sponsored today by Accorda Therapeutics, Amgen, Biogen IDIC, Bristol Myers Squibb, Human Genome Sciences, Johnson & Johnson, La Jolla Pharmaceutical Company, MedImmune, Roche, Serono, Tanix, and Wyeth. All great companies, all working on autoimmune disorders to try to find cures. There are historically a couple areas where biotechnology healthcare products have shown promise and have led to development of therapies. We have, of course, oncology for the cancer products. We have autoimmune diseases, which we'll hear about today. We have some other areas, cardio areas, which have been really advanced through biotechnology. So we are hearing today from Sandra Raymond with the Lupus Foundation of America, David Simmons with Wyeth, John Klippel with the Arthritis Foundation, and Steve Engle of La Jolla Pharmaceuticals. So again, I'm Brent Del Monte. Whatever you need from Bio, let me know and we'll get that for you. And now we'll turn it over to Sandra Raymond.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Please continue to eat. I know those among the thorns here. I want to say that I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to talk about the hope that biotechnology brings to individuals with lupus. But I first want to tell you about one person with lupus, and you may have heard about her last week on NBC's Today Show, where they highlighted her struggle. Cassie Bigelow is her name. She was a young wife and a mother who worked as a personal care attendant for a man named David Lytle. She was actually a high school friend of David's. David was paralyzed after an auto accident, and every day Cassie came to care for him, even though she was in excruciating pain. Joint pain, she had chest pain from lupus. David said she never complained. Lupus caused Cassie to have a heart attack only 2 weeks after she delivered her baby. And last year, due to an infection that her body could not fight because her immune system was so suppressed, she died just one day before her 31st birthday. She left to mourn a 2-month-old son, a husband, a best friend, and the Lupus Foundation of America. So to honor Cassie and tell her story, David nominated the Lupus Foundation of America to receive the proceeds of the Today Show's Green Room autograph book, which is now being auctioned on eBay. Cassie Bigelow's untimely death sadly demonstrates that lupus is a disease that strikes mainly young women of childbearing age. Well, it's too late for Cassie, but it's not too late for the 1.5 million Americans, mostly women, and 5 million worldwide living with lupus. Here are some facts. Lupus is a chronic autoimmune disease that causes inflammation and tissue damage to virtually any organ system in the body. It can cause significant disability, and it does cause death. Lupus strikes women 9 times more often, and typically than men, and typically young women between the ages of 15 and 44 are affected. Women of color are at highest risk, and I want to stress that, because this is a health disparity that remains unexplained. 25% of people with lupus become disabled, and more than a third of people with lupus develop lupus kidney disease. Many go on dialysis, and some have kidney transplants. For your information, the first double lung transplant in the United States was performed on a lupus patient. And many young women develop bone fractures, actually osteoporosis, as a result of the disease itself and the bone-wasting medications they must take. I think it's really dramatic and quite scandalous that there have been no new medications approved by the FDA for lupus in 40 years.
4 decades. But because of the pioneering and innovative efforts of biotechnology companies, hope is on the horizon, with almost 20 companies investing in bringing new treatments to market for lupus.
But we urgently need some successes. The medications people with lupus are now taking and have been taking for a lifetime are really have very harsh and toxic side effects, sometimes worse than the disease itself. For example, the present standard of care for lupus kidney disease is a drug called Cytoxan, which is a harsh chemotherapy. So you're 20 years old and you have lupus kidney disease, and you're taking a chemotherapy that causes nausea, causes you to lose your hair at the age of 20 or 30 years old. Clearly, we've entered a new era, I think an era of hope, for people with lupus and the 23 million Americans who have some form of autoimmune disease. To fulfill the promise, Congress has given the FDA a number of tools to advance research in medically underserved diseases such as lupus. However, congressional oversight is needed to ensure that the laws on the books are properly utilized. For example, Subpart H of the FDA regulations is designed to accelerate the availability of new treatments for diseases which have no good treatments. That provision is used for many types of agents, but is not being adequately utilized for lupus agents. For biologics, Subpart E provides that approval may be based on a surrogate endpoint or on an effect on a clinical endpoint, and like Subpart H, this provision should be considered in lupus drug approvals. The FDA has also introduced its Critical Path Initiative, which, if fully implemented, could speed the development of new treatments for lupus and other autoimmune diseases. This program, however, must be given the support and the resources necessary to succeed. Reasonable incentives need to be provided for companies to make it worthwhile for them to research very complex diseases that do not have an enormous patient base. Last year, the FDA issued for the first time a lupus guidance document that was intended to provide a roadmap for industry clinical trials. In part, the document addresses the outcome measures a company may use to assess the efficacy of a new agent. For example, the use of validated biomarkers as an outcome measure would greatly speed drug development in lupus. Yet while the NIH has had a potential list of candidate markers that could be tested and validated, no funds have been allocated either by the NIH or by the FDA for that purpose. Finally, advocates have a great concern about NIH research priorities due to the recent cutbacks in appropriations and the growing emphasis on bioterrorism agents and potential pandemics such as the avian flu. there really is an urgent need for a balanced risk-benefit approach to ensure that the biomedical research effort continues and expands. So the promise of safe, new, effective, and non-toxic drugs is a priority for those with lupus. The biotechnology industry is working hard to ensure that underserved diseases are addressed. With government on their side, biotechnology can and will deliver a better quality of life for those with lupus and other autoimmune diseases. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. JingsonWang, board-certified rheumatologist, joined Wyeth Research recently from Brigham Women's Hospital and Harvard Medical School in Boston. Currently, I'm an Associate Director of Translational Medicine at Wyeth Research in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to have an overview of the biotechnology-based therapies approved by FDA for the treatment of autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease are a group of severe chronic illnesses that involve almost every human organ system. Abnormal activation of immune cells and overproduction of some of the harmful mediators produced by those cells are the key central feature of this group of disease. Previously, the treatment of autoimmune disease was aimed at suppression of pain and other signs and symptoms of the disease, but afforded little opportunity to alter the courses of the disease and prevent disability. This has been changed since the introduction of the biotechnology-based therapy in this disease area. The available biologics, protein drugs produced by biotechnology, has revolutionized this area. Biologics represent the first therapies for autoimmune disease that have a well-defined mechanism of action. Each inhibitor as single mediator molecules or critical checkpoints relatively proximal to the inflammatory pathway. Biologics have been used in varieties of autoimmune disease through targeting immune cells such as T cells in the immune system, or through targeting the immune cell mediators such as tumor necrosis factor, interleukin-1, or interferon beta. Rheumatoid arthritis is one of the most common forms of autoimmune disease. It is a chronic inflammatory disorder with the potential to cause destructive joint disease, significant disability, and increased mortality. Currently, there are multiple biologics targeting tumor necrosis factor or interleukin-1 or modulating signals required for T cell activation have been approved by FDA to treat this devastating, debilitating disease. Psoriasis is another autoimmune disease that manifests as a distressing chronic inflammation of the skin. Biologics modulating T cell function have also been approved for the treatment of adult patients with moderate to severe chronic plaque disease. Multiple sclerosis is another devastating autoimmune disease of the central nerve system. At the present time, there are multiple biologics targeting interferon beta or regulating the immune cell migration has been approved for the treatment of relapsing form of this disease. In addition, biologics targeting tumor necrosis factor have been approved for the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease, which include Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. and ankylosing spondylitis, the inflammation of the spine, and psoriatic arthritis related to psoriasis, and also certain type of arthritis occurred in children. These biologics have proven to be highly potent therapy in controlling signs and symptoms of this disease within days to weeks after the initiation of the treatment. They have dramatically improved the lives of people with autoimmune disease. Furthermore, blockers of tumor necrosis factor inhibit the progressive damage to articular structure of inflammatory arthritis and tissue destruction in Crohn's disease. Biologics have redefined the disease-modifying drugs and are, no doubt, transforming the treatment for autoimmune disease. Treat early and aggressive. Stop structural damage due to the chronic uncontrolled inflammation in autoimmune disease is becoming a new standard practice. The success of biologics have instilled hope for patients and generate phenomenal interest both from scientific and industry. Through the success launch of this biologics and treatment of the patients with autoimmune disease, we can also learn a few lessons along the way. First, the delivery of such biologics to the clinical arena is a result of tremendous advancement of biomedical science in bringing our understanding of the molecular mechanism of the disease and translate into the therapeutic arena. To sustain such a success, enhanced translational biomedical research is needed both at the academia and industry. In this regard, we applaud a roadmap initiative at NIH and a critical path initiative at FDA. This initiative promotes translational research and emphasizes the needs for better understanding the mechanism of disease while we're developing drugs. Second, the development of biological therapy takes years, sometimes decades, of intense basic and clinical research and discovery. Furthermore, the effectiveness and popularity of the current approved biologics limit the availability of patients for preclinical trials in the United States. In addition, those proved effective therapy has risen the bar for future drug development. Third, there are adverse events associated with the use of biologics, just like many other medications. Most of these events are related to infectious complications due to modulation of the immune system. We take patient safety very seriously. However, we must realize that the biologics are often the only hope, the only effective therapy for some of the debilitating and life-threatening autoimmune disease patients. We believe the central role of informed patient choice to allow patients make their own choices based on the fact, not just the panic. Broadest availability of effective biologics for autoimmune disease, along with the complete and the defined information for the benefit and the risk, should be available to the patient for them to make such informed decision. In summary, biologics have revolutionized the treatment for autoimmune disease due to their efficacy, speed of onset, and tolerability. They have dramatically improved the lives of thousands, millions of patients with autoimmune disease. Biologics are the state of the art and are proving to be the future of autoimmune disease treatment. The ongoing success will further our commitment to discover and develop more efficacious and safer biologics. One of the future challenges is how to use biologics to induce disease remission, to cure disease. This discussion is something unthinkable only a few years ago. And with the current success, this is becoming a reality. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Jack Klippel. I'm with the Arthritis Foundation. I'm very pleased to be here and want to thank all of you for coming. So I have four goals in the few minutes that we're spending together. One is like Dr. Wang, who I learned was an Arthritis Foundation fellow. We're very proud of people like Dr. Wang being able to support them. I want to talk about autoimmunity to make sure that we all understand the magnitude of the problem. I want to talk about the excitement of biotechnology and the impact it's had in autoimmunity, and we'll use arthritis as an example. I want to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that we are all faced with because of advances in biotechnology. And finally, I'd like to talk about the future because I think it's very exciting. So what is autoimmunity? Well, for those of you who are Greek scholars, you know auto means self, and immunity means something to do with immunity, of course. And I'm making an assumption that there are very few biologic measures here in the audience. So I was trying to think of how I describe the immune system, and it's a bit like homeland security. The job of the immune system is to be on guard so that nothing bad happens to us, particularly infections. And so it's typically very silent. It's in the background. We don't know that it's there. And we're by and large healthy because it does its job right. What happens in autoimmunity is something awful goes awry and it decides it's going to attack. We don't know yet why that happens, but we will figure that out through research. So it can attack almost anything. It attacks the skin. It produces diseases like psoriasis. It attacks the joints and produces arthritis. It attacks the brain and produces multiple sclerosis. It attacks the bowel and produces inflammatory bowel disease. So those are examples of diseases that we call autoimmunity. How big is the problem? It's huge. The NIH estimates that as many as 24 million people collectively have autoimmunity. We need to get serious about it. Who gets affected? Anybody. Typically young women. Sandra talked about this being a women's health issue, and for many diseases it is a women's health issue. But it also affects kids. 300,000 kids in this country have a form of autoimmunity we call juvenile arthritis. And for every person with autoimmunity, their life is threatened. The quality of their life declines. And for all forms of autoimmunity, they are threatened with the fact that they could die from their disease. That's autoimmunity. We need to get serious about it. What has biotechnology done for autoimmunity? Well, let me speak about rheumatoid arthritis, a disease which affects 2.1 million people in this country, about 1% of the population. Most everybody in the room knows somebody with this disease. The typical person is in their teens when they get the disease. They're going to live with it for the rest of their lives. I first learned about this disease and going to medical school in the 1970s. And what I was taught is that they get better if you give them aspirin, usually in very high doses. It sometimes helps to put them in the hospital. They feel better. And there's a couple drugs you can use, one of which was gold, and the first thing I was told is we don't have a clue how this works. And it doesn't work very well in most people. Well, if I were a person with rheumatoid arthritis, I'd be pretty discouraged if that's what it's all about. All of that changed in 1999 with the development of biotechnology products directed against a single molecule called tumor necrosis factor. So that's 6 years ago, in which we suddenly had available drugs that within a matter of days of starting this, the person with rheumatoid arthritis felt better. So the quality of their life is improved. And what we've learned shortly thereafter is the damage to joints in this disease was halted. So we now have three products that are directed at TNF. Two amazing things happened. Suddenly we learned that these products help other forms of autoimmunity. They help juvenile arthritis, this same product. They help psoriasis. They help psoriatic arthritis. They help ankylosing spondylitis. So we're suddenly seeing a spreading of the people who benefit from this drug. Another interesting thing has happened is that we're now seeing new biologics introduced against other targets. The FDA approved a drug in December of last year. So we're now talking about second-generation biologics. And in fact, what's likely to happen this year is a biologic agent developed for a completely different disease, cancer, is likely to be approved for use in rheumatoid arthritis. That's the power of biotechnology. What are the challenges and opportunities for us? Well, one of the challenges is that we need to then make sure that every person in this country who can benefit from these drugs has access to these drugs. And access means two things. They need to be diagnosed as early as possible. That means that we're going to have to pay attention to the healthcare system and make whatever changes are needed to get these people identified early, typically by specialists. Whether these are rheumatologists if the person has arthritis or lupus, neurologists if they have multiple sclerosis, dermatologists if they have skin disease. And finally, the richest nation in the world for sure should be able to find ways to find that these drugs are paid for. If we have advances in therapy, it should be our obligation to make sure that these are actually paid for. Finally, what's the future? Our investment in research is paying off, and biotechnology is a clear example of that. As we begin to understand diseases better, biotechnology takes advantage of that information to produce drugs that are truly effective and minimize the risk for side effects. Like it or not, I think we are integrally linked to two things: continuing to invest in research to learn more about these diseases, and the ability of biotechnology to take advantage of that information to produce drugs that will eventually cure our diseases. I see a day when biotechnology is able to rebuild damage that occurs in diseases like osteoarthritis. And for autoimmunity, I'm one who believes that biotechnology in some way will figure out a way to create a healthy new immune system so that people truly don't develop this disease. And we can say once and for all, we have truly cured autoimmunity, and biotechnology will take us there. Thank you very much.
I'm Steve Engle with Wyeth Pharmaceutical, and I'm going to talk about the promise of biotechnology and what's in the pipeline. Due to time limits, I won't be able to cover everything, but really just highlight some of the more important therapeutic approaches. Also, I'll just note up front, I'm not an MD, so I may be practicing without a license. The good news is in some diseases, as Jack and Sandra and Dr. Wang were all indicating, that we are making progress in developing new drugs that will be safer, more efficacious, and also easier to comply with. That is, to be able to get access to and to inject and maybe even have oral. Even more importantly, in other diseases, we will actually potentially have the first drugs ever in these diseases to help the patients. I'm reminded that every time a little old lady stands up on TV and complains about the cost of drugs, that we ought to have another little old lady stand up and complain about the fact that she doesn't have any drugs. We are moving from destroying the entire immune system, as Jack was pointing out, to targeting just the parts that cause the disease. The disclaimer remains that there is no cure. Still, we have more projects. I'm delighted to say that according to Pharma Projects, there are 288 drugs being developed in the autoimmune disease area. Many of these are aimed at the immune system, as Jack was pointing out. I would also, and it's up quite a bit over the last few years, I would also point out that in comparison, however, there's still quite a bit more drugs being developed for cardiovascular and for areas such as cancer. Cancer has over 2,000 drugs in development. So it gives you an idea of how far we need to go in helping to assure that drugs are being developed in this area, as Sandra was talking about. Let me talk about some trends in autoimmune disease drug development before I talk about specific areas. The new drugs, as my colleagues have indicated, are likely to work in multiple diseases, suppressing key types of immune cells, both T and B cells, will probably result in great efficacy in a number of different diseases. And we see cancer drugs for B cell lymphoma that may be also useful in lupus and other diseases. Also, drugs that are being used to prevent organ rejection are likely to have a positive effect. New drugs are moving from general immune suppression to more specific laser-like targeting. The more specific the activity of these drugs, the less likely it is that they're going to have side effects, and we'll be able to get rid of the general immune suppression that we currently see with the drugs that we're using. And this leaves our patients susceptible to life-threatening infections. And if you look at the cost of these diseases, you'll note that it's not the cost of the drugs, the old drugs that we've been using, it's really the cost of hospitalization and the loss of jobs and the loss of their lives, essentially, as we go through and look at the penalties paid. New drugs are increasing patient diagnosis. Since the day prior to the advent of MS drugs, physicians wondered whether to tell patients about their lesions, as no therapy really existed. Now young women are coming in at the first sign of disease, desperate to get the right diagnosis and the right treatment to prevent progressive disability, all because the drugs are available. New drugs will likely be used in combination. There's not likely to be just one drug for one disease. In autoimmune diseases, individual patients often present a complex disease profile that is highly variable. It is unlikely that one treatment will work and be effective in all patients, and an initially effective drug may not work as well as the disease progresses. Therefore, a combination of drugs will be likely. New drugs are leading to the increased patient enrollment in clinical studies, a critical step in the development of drugs, and a costly problem for all of us, as this is what slows the process down, as well as where a lot of the money goes in developing drugs. And new drugs increase the number of new drugs. As has been indicated by my colleagues, clinical success provides proven clinical study tools and effective trial designs. Regulatory risk is reduced significantly after the first drug is approved. The FDA builds up the required expertise and develops the regulatory philosophy to approve more drugs. Drug development in multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis has changed dramatically as a result of the drugs that are already out there. The ACR20 measurement is absolutely critical to moving forward in RA. Unfortunately, lupus patients are still waiting for these kinds of steps forward. In talking about the diseases, let me just talk about a couple of them as we go through this. Recent agents have revolutionized the treatment in rheumatoid arthritis. We're now looking at a second generation of anti-TNF compounds coming along. And as Jack indicated, a new drug specifically designed to interrupt a co-stimulatory signal needed for the activation of T cells has been recently approved by the FDA for RA, and we suspect that it will actually show efficacy in a number of diseases. One approach to treating rheumatoid arthritis has been to reduce the number of B cells, which produce antibodies and activate T cells. Companies have tested a drug approved originally for cancer in lupus, and we are waiting for FDA approval at this time. This also is being developed for MS and vasculitis. Another approach is to reduce the number of B cells through a new biologic therapy that reduces a protein called BLyS or BAFF and plays a critical role in stimulating B cells. And there are a number of other things. I would also notice that biomarkers are very important in this area, and there are some companies aiming towards supporting that area and in personalized medicine. In MS, we've talked about some of the things coming along, but I would notice for the group that with earlier drugs, the relapse rate stood about 1 flare per patient per year. With the current drugs, it's about once every 3 years. And with the newest drug that's almost available to patients, it's once in every 4 or 5 years. So we're seeing dramatic changes in efficacy. That drug, we're waiting now for the FDA to hold a public advisory committee meeting, which is scheduled for March, to talk about whether it will be reintroduced in the United States. There are a number of other approaches in this area. Unfortunately, time doesn't allow me to cover everything. Let me jump to lupus for just a moment. We would notice in lupus that we are still waiting for the first generation of drugs. A general immunosuppressant drug used for years in prevention of organ rejection is being tested. As previously mentioned, several drugs are being tried in lupus. One drug is being designed to actually focus in on just the B cells generating double-stranded DNA antibodies, and that drug is in another phase 3 study one more time. And also the use of things like DHEA, formulation of which working on the idea of improving hormone levels in patients who have lupus. I won't talk about some of the other diseases, but I do want to talk for just a second about what we can do to help the process along. Obviously, there have been a number of positive changes in the last few years. A rise in a stronger patient advocacy group, and you've seen it in the people here at the table with us, and there are many others. Another is the public's focus on what the statisticians call type 2 errors. That is, not approving drugs that work. Increased FDA resources have also helped following the PDUFA expansion of some of the funding, and Congress's own approval of special regulations for orphan drugs, and as Sandra pointed out, for Subpart E and H. Currently, the key issues are the proper application of existing regulatory processes for life-threatening diseases in orphan populations, also maintaining incentives for research, ensuring access to new therapies, making the sharing of the cost of research a trade issue, and speeding up the development through increased trial recruitment. Only two of these I would like to talk to right now. One is we need different reviews for different diseases. I can't tell you how painful it was to the lupus patient community and to our company in the review process last year as we watched the Grassley initiative kind of overwhelm any thought about what was going on with the orphan drugs for life-threatening diseases. In particular, we need to distinguish between life-threatening situations and the drugs that are being developed for those in the regulatory process and those for lifestyle issues and incremental improvements. We must balance the risk and benefit, as there is no perfect drug. And particularly in the case of life-threatening diseases where there have been no new drugs for 40 years. There, I would note, also are no risk-free cars. But somehow that logic doesn't come into this. We have to distinguish between enhanced aspirins and the drugs for life-threatening diseases. Regulations that recognize this need, like Subpart H, need to be used rather routinely rather than as they are right now. Unfortunately, except for HIV infections, where they've had tremendous effect on the number of drugs available, and for cancer, they are not being used widely. Something that was approved by the Congress and one would expect Congress would want to have oversight over. The new drugs require industry investments, regulatory expertise, and staffing and reimbursement, but there is also a great need for patient volunteers. We are constantly discussing rising healthcare costs and the lack of insurance for millions of Americans. But I would argue that the real problem killing and disabling patients and stifling medical innovation is something else. The number of patients volunteering for clinical trials. Simply put, we don't have enough of them. We've got over 1,000 biotechnology companies developing new therapies. Right now, 300 experimental compounds are in the later stages of clinical trials and require more human participants. But a lack of them means that many patients won't live long enough to enjoy the benefits. There is a role for government as well as industry and the patient advocacy groups in this particular challenge. The future of healthcare lies with all of us, patient advocates, doctors, government, industry, and most importantly, with everyday citizens. If we want to continue to reap the benefit of medical breakthroughs, we have to change the way we think about the process itself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Loso, the Director of Outreach for Bio, and stepping in for Brent Del Monte, who had to leave. First, I want to thank Kim Parker and Congressman Rush's office on the Biotech Caucus for helping bring this together for us. And I'd also again like to thank the 12 sponsoring companies that we've had. I want to open this up for questions, but I do want to make one comment. I was with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society for 13 years, and during the first 10 years of that, there were no products for people with MS to treat the disease itself, only the symptoms. And now, just about 10 short years, not even 10 years since, we have, I think, 5 approved drugs for multiple sclerosis that affect the course of the disease itself. It's just amazing, and what's coming. To give you an idea of what the range of autoimmune diseases there are, because you've heard mostly the bigger names, the Sjogren's disease. Out on the table is a pamphlet from the American Autoimmune Diseases Related Association that lists most of the autoimmune diseases. I'm not sure how many there are. 100 autoimmune diseases. With that, I want to open this up for questions. Yeah.
Dr. Klippel, as Dr. Klippel mentioned, some of these new drugs have had unbelievably remarkable clinical impact on individual patients, and many of them. But one of the key problems from a policy point of view, which is something you also talked on, was the price. It seems like a number of these new targeted biological therapies are 2 orders of magnitude more expensive than traditional pharmaceuticals. And at a time when everybody is screaming about the high cost of health care and the high cost of Medicare and so forth, my question is are the biotechnology companies looking at possibly new procedures or paradigms of drug identification, drug discovery, drug development that might be able to result in somewhat cheaper medications? I know that the process is very difficult and there are a lot of failures, but is there any thought being given to try and develop new procedures that might be able to produce the desired wonder drugs at a lower cost?
Dr. Wang or Steve, you want to?
Address to Dr. Klippel.
Okay.
Did I miss that?
Well, let me start this, and then there may be more qualified people on the panel to speak to this than me, and I'll use arthritis as an example. The cost of arthritis in this country each year is $82 billion. $82 billion. Part of the reason that the costs are so high is the chronicity of this disease. I would postulate that if in fact we used expensive drugs to shut these diseases off early, the cost to the nation, the cost savings to the nation would be enormous. I'll start a dialogue. My colleagues may or may not agree with this. I actually think over time we're going to see the cost of biologics drop. And they're going to drop substantially. It's like any new technology. If you wanted to buy a plasma TV 10 years ago, you would have been in deep trouble. And now the cost of plasma TVs, such that most of us can afford this. I think we are going to see the cost of technology come down. On the other hand, these drugs are always going to cost money. And I think we first and foremost just have to recognize what problem are we trying to solve. And for arthritis, we're trying to solve a problem that's an $82 billion problem, and that has to be factored into this.
I just wanted to say that it isn't only the price of any drug. It's the price of the visits to the 5 doctors. It's the cost of hospitalization on a repeated basis. I'll tell you about one woman, a young woman in Chicago, who, because of lupus, has frequent chest pains and cardiac problems, and is in the hospital once a month. So it's 12 times a year. She has about 4 doctors, so her doctor visits are costing as well. If you have a drug that can really target what's going on with her, perhaps there will be fewer doctor visits, there will be fewer hospital visits. So I think it isn't just the cost of the drugs that we have to consider. Not to say that I want high-priced drugs, I don't. No advocacy group would ever be here and say that, but what I am saying is that it's a larger picture.
I would like to comment on, from an industry standpoint of view, is there a better way to do clinical drug development? Based on the fact that we are trying to deliver high quality biologics to the patient, to the healthcare providers, to the patients. And there are many factors, such as some of the factors already alluded earlier, is that the expense involved in the clinical trials, the lack of availability of patients, volunteers, and the higher standard for drug safety studies will have to be affecting. Despite all that, within industry, at least at Wyeth, we have constantly looking for better ways and more efficient ways to perform our drug development during this process. The attrition rate, the failure rate of some of the development process has been looking upon what are the key factors, and certainly there are constant movement to try to do better, do more efficient and in this drug development process.
Yeah, I would just add one other thing, which is that the reason why companies like Biogen and so forth are around is biotechnology is the next generation solution to developing drugs. And that what these little companies have come up with, now big companies, was the next step in how to develop drugs with a willingness to take the risk to go out there and do that. We're currently at $350 million into developing a drug for lupus. We've got another 2 years. We'll be at $600 to $700 million before we're finished, and I doubt there's anybody that could be any more efficient with the money than we are. So there are some fundamentals here. It's not just what the companies are doing. It's not just what the NIH is doing. It's also the regulatory process and the costs and so forth that go into that. And this whole issue you've heard a couple of times about emphasizing the use of biomarkers and the use of these regulations was because your brethren on the Hill, people reporting to Kennedy and others, have put these rules in place because diseases like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis and so forth are diseases they recognize aren't going to get the kind of attention they need without the use of those rules. Now the question is, are we focusing to use those rules when we actually get a drug finally through the process to make it happen? And I think that's where the Congress can have a big impact, is making sure people really are doing what the Congress's will was for making this thing happen.
Just let me follow up briefly on what you said. The problem is not, again, this is Dr. Klippel, the problem is not that it's going to save $84 billion in the long term. 82. Well, I'm accounting for inflation here. The problem is that the people who pay the $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 now for something like Gleevec or equivalent for rheumatoid arthritis are not going to be the ones that are going to save the $82 billion. And that's where the discrepancy comes in, that the savings may accrue to somebody other than the insurance company that's now facing a $20,000 or $30,000 bill. And it seems to me like that's going to be an ongoing problem with these new, admittedly very effective, but very high-cost therapies. And it's going to be a big challenge to figure out how to translate those initial costs and the long-term savings, and to somehow get those to mesh up. Because certainly on Capitol Hill, the timeline is not very long in terms of how far ahead do people look.
Can I just... So you could give me an education on policy, and I'd be the first to tell you that I could use that. And I could help you sit in a waiting room with a person who is faced with a therapy that will change their lives, and I have to explain to them that it's not available to them. So we both have tough jobs.
We do the same thing.
Right.
We get the same costs.
Right.
Sorry. My name is Dave Cole from Roche, and first of all, I'd like to thank all of the panelists today. My question, again, revolves around the move, at least with the treaters, towards earlier and more aggressive treatment. Again, not only are you seeing this with the specialists, but you're also seeing with primary care physicians as well. And, you know, most of these drugs that you've spoken about, the biologics, the TNF-alphas, at least one of them has already gotten an approval indication for first-line usage, and others are likely to follow. However, there's a disparity when you look at the payers. The payers are saying, if you meet the criteria, we will cover most of these drugs. Although these drugs aren't on formularies, they are covered if the patients need them. But you still have to fail on several courses of DMARDs first. So instead of thinking about, well, if we were to allow patients to use biologics earlier, we would probably prevent them getting to a condition where they would become more advanced. What do you see as the primary mechanism or the evolution in bringing the payers and the treaters into line as far as their thinking?
So I happen to believe that the whole area of pharmacogenomics is going to change this, and it's going to help solve the problem that he and I are struggling with, right? One of the challenges with drugs, if I give you a drug, is I can tell you, I'm not 100% sure this is going to work, right? And moreover, this can cause us huge problems that neither of us want. What's going to happen with pharmacogenomics in our lifetime, I hope, is I'm going to be able to tell you with a high degree of likelihood whether this drug's going to work or not, and with a high degree of likelihood as to whether we're going to have trouble with this drug. I think it's going to help solve some of the payment issues, and it's going to help refine who's going to benefit from these drugs. Right? So I think pharmacogenomics is linked to our successful use of biotechnology in the future.
I notice on page 10 of this MS brochure, it says many experts now recommend treatment as early as possible with one of the 5 approved agents. If you're newly diagnosed with, say, MS, how do you find a physician who's up to date and even knows that these 5 agents exist?
You want to, Sandra, you have to deal with that
Do they all?
issue too.
Well, yeah, okay. We'll try to get up again. I think you raise a very, very good point. I think that education of our physicians across the country, and remember what they have to do. They have to keep track of so many different medications for so many different diseases. Certainly continuing medical education that is easy for them to get, such as webcasting and the kinds of programs that, for example, we do at the Lupus Foundation of America is very, very important. We've embarked upon a 3-year program where we're educating not only rheumatologists and specialists, but also primary care physicians about current treatments for lupus. So it's incumbent upon the advocacy group and even government to engage in better education for physicians. This is a problem that we've identified, and it's a key problem because doctors really can't keep pace with what's new, and many do not, and that is the reality of the situation.
My question is a little different. From a patient's perspective, yes, we'd like to improve the education of all the physicians in the country. But in the meantime, what is the patient to do?
Well, patients are becoming very informed, I think, through going to websites and keeping track of information through clearinghouses, and I think it's difficult for patients as well. I know that lupus patients are very well-educated individuals who are constantly looking for what's new. and we're sending e-newsletters, they're going to WebMD, they're going to all the sites. Sites are linked to drug companies. So, more and more the individual is responsible for their own health care. That's the bottom line. That's the way it's going to be in this country, and the sooner we all recognize that, the healthier we're going to be.
It's probably a large number of sufferers of autoimmune disease are on disability, therefore probably eligible for Medicare. They're probably dealing, well, first of all, saves money on disability and the Medicare, but right now, what's your initial experience with the Part D?
Well, I'll speak first, I guess. Actually, we're at the Lupus Foundation in America, we're coordinating a huge coalition of groups of advocacy groups that address chronic disease. And we're finding a tremendous amount of problem, especially for those individuals with chronic disease. The main problem right now is with the dual eligibles, the people that were supposed to be automatically enrolled, and there's tremendous problem there. The experience has not been a positive one for tens of thousands of people. Dr. McClellan recently said that 30,000 individuals are having problems, and that's not a big number. I consider 30,000 people having problems with Medicare Part D a big problem, and I think there are probably more people out there. So it's been a very bumpy ride, and I do think that Congress and many individuals in the Congress are looking at this program now and trying to figure out how we make this program run more smoothly. It's a great concept. It is a tremendously complex program. States are paying for medications out of their own coffers until this gets straightened out. The experience for chronic disease has not been good to this point in time.
Virginia?
With the Autoimmune Association. And I have a question, maybe it would be for Steve because he alluded to this, and that is patients having a voice and choice in the risks versus benefits of drugs. And I know our association has felt strongly. We've developed a position paper on that, and we believe that a physician and their patient should have much more of a choice in the risk versus benefit discussion. But I would like to know what biotech industry, when they're speaking from their perspective, risk versus benefit is in money terms. And one of our concerns is that it's a whole different discussion. I'm not now speaking about the drug. I'm speaking about the risk of investment as to the possible benefit. And one of our concerns is that we've already heard that there's 75% less drugs in the pipeline for autoimmune diseases than there is for cancer, when there's twice as many patients with cancer with autoimmune disease than cancer. So our concern is that companies will make a decision not to proceed with drugs that may benefit this population because of this risk versus benefit and the weight being on less risk, and we all know there are drugs that are, this is it happening in MS and rheumatoid arthritis. Anyway, if you could address that.
Yeah, again, I think it's everybody's concern, patients as well, that somehow the next step in the development of drugs somehow going to put up a sign, a big X, don't go this way. And I think we're all concerned about it. I can tell you when we first started working in lupus, I can't tell you how many companies came up who might have been partners with us over times to help develop it and say, oh no, we've talked to our guys, we're not going that way. And so there really is an issue here, and every time there's a problem that's thrown into the road of development of these drugs, the industry interprets that, and now I'm talking about everybody, pharmaceutical, et cetera, goes in to interpret that, whether we can actually get a drug through this area. And so this business of developing a drug, that first one that goes through has a huge impact. Jack and I were talking about with rheumatoid arthritis, the first one through, we set the rules. Everybody said, hey, now we have an understanding. We know what's going to happen when we go to the final meeting and we ask, can we get this approved? And they go, yeah, because you met the rules for the other one, we got to approve this one. And like it or not, that's how the conversation goes. If there's been no drug approved in that area, you are way out there on the probabilities of being able to get anything done. And that's why Congress developed these Subpart E and H rules, is to make sure that the agency understood that there's supposed to be a different attitude, because they also recognize nothing's going to get developed. And that's not good. Remember, what you're trying to do here is you've got this big healthcare pie, and who cares if some of it shifts from from the hospital cost side to the drug side? Do I care as a citizen? I don't think so. I may care as a biotech CEO, of course, but as a citizen, I don't think I care. It's still a big pie. You're trying to shift it over, and the drugs have to be effective and safe to do that. And so that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to shift that pie around so it's more efficient, less time in the clinic or in the hospital, and lower costs overall. If you look at the lupus patients, for example, and we've done the studies, we've looked at the national information on this, the average patient that we're targeting, we aren't looking for our drug to be used in milder patients or whatever, but the patients that we're targeting who have lupus nephritis, kidney disease on a routine basis, go in the hospital once or twice a year. And every time they go in, it's $20,000 to $30,000. And even the ones who don't go in are on such high-dose steroids that these patients end up losing their hips, and they end up having, once he's 21 years of age, he's already had both hips replaced. Okay? So that's what's going on here. So please don't think about it as the money we could have spent over here versus there. The reality is you are going to spend this money. And I can tell you something else about lupus patients that we know from the research, is it used to be, and I think Dr. Klippel was one of the people involved in these studies, the average lifetime on a lupus patient to survive at 10 years, about half the population was gone. Well, that's a lot better now because of steroids and chemotherapy and so forth. But the bad news is, because of those drugs, they have a lot more problems that have to be taken care of in the hospital and other places. And now what you're talking about is a ballooning cost, because these patients used to not survive, pardon me folks, but they used to not survive. Now they're surviving, but they're in the hospital all the time. And so what you're saying to yourself is, my gosh, the cost curve has to be going right out of sight for lupus patients. Now, if that doesn't scare you into saying, we darn well better do something about this, I don't know what does. Because if you don't innovate, you are going to see these costs go up, and we'll end up like Oregon, where it will be left up to Congress to decide which one of the diseases gets paid for this year. And you don't want to be in the middle of that crossfire.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that as an obstacle, one of the obstacles to getting the drugs is lack of participation in clinical trials. Can you expand on that a little bit? How much of an obstacle, how slow does that make it, and why are folks not participating?
Yeah. It's a complex conversation, but the short form is that if no drugs have been successful, first of all, then patients and physicians are not necessarily even very involved in the process, because they don't know something could be done for them. They think they're still in that other world that Jack was talking about, where there's never been a drug developed for the rheumatoid arthritis patients. Now that there's a drug out there, everybody's signed up. All the clinicians want to get in because they need to publish papers and they want to help patients and they want to move things forward. The other thing is that the development side has kind of ramped up in terms of what's going on with the FDA, because they understand what's required to make these things happen. So the issue with the patients is to me, one of volunteerism. If you look at our costs for doing clinical trials, we're running a trial right now, it'll be between $60 and $90 million to run. Okay, not something the NIH is going to finance tomorrow morning. That trial probably could be done in half or a third of the time, and time is what's driving cost. So we could not only have it sooner, we could have it at 1/3 the cost. Okay, that translates into lives, it translates into hospitalization, and it translates into how much money my company has to run up in order to be able to finance it. How do we get those patients in? What we see when we do studies on when patients don't enroll trials, it's not what you think. Even in diseases like cancer, where people think that they're going to die from it, you find out the percentage of cancer patients being involved in these trials is like less than 5%. And it's mind-boggling, right? Because for many of these diseases, that's the only solution is to try something. And what I think part of it is there's a lack of awareness on the American citizen, the American patient's part as to what they could be involved in. I think if the next time the president gives out a Medal of Freedom, it went to patients in clinical trial to help develop a new drug, then we could have an impact on the general awareness of the importance. But I can guarantee you that while we're running this trial, lupus patients are going to die, they're going to be hospitalized, and lots of money is going to be run up. And you say to yourself, all I needed was 600 patients, and there's 1.5 million plus out there. What do I got to do this? And so it's a major issue, and I don't think it's just one side or the other. It's not just government. It's the physicians, it's also the patients, and it's also the companies. We need to get together. There needs to be a way to pull that together and raise the awareness.
Is there any, this is probably an ignorance question more than anything, but is there any method for direct contact with the public in regards to clinical trials?
Well, there are websites, and we work through the physicians because they're the experts. They know whether the patients fall into categories, and because they're actually the ones who are involved in talking to the patients. We don't want to have that direct contact at that level. But there are sites to tell them where the trials are, clinical.gov.
Clinicaltrials.gov, yeah.
Thank you. Tells them about it. I think the issue is more at a higher level. If they were giving out, again, if patients upon completing a trial for a major new drug got approved and they brought all the patients in the room and on TV handed them a medal for being in that trial, thank God you did this because the rest of us wish we had the time, guts, or whatever to do it, then the attitude would shift. But right now it's not. So instead I'm going to spend $90 million doing this trial. It's going to take 2 to 3 years. And all that loss is, you go back to cost savings on the federal budget, you think to yourself, if I could speed up the introduction of these drugs, what I could do to my long-term costs.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your coming.